see some of the world, work for other people, be out of just like my American bubble for a while. And so I applied and I had no idea where I was gonna go. I was really open. I said, send me anywhere in the world. And I was placed in Romania.
Wow.
So yeah, I've sort of looked at it as all of these pieces that fit together to make me more like, I don't know, proficient sounds like such a like dry word. Yeah. I'm a croissant. I really don't like to run. Like, I don't like to run.
I did the same thing.
And I was like, and I really leaned on my sister who motivated me, and I started running, and then I started running a little more, and then I ran a half marathon. I was like, I'm gonna run a marathon. And then I ran like 4 marathons, you know? And it's mostly just like I do things to really challenge myself.
Dana Frank is a sommelier, restaurateur, author, and now wine importer, and a bit of a legend in the Portland food scene. You might know her as the author of Wine Food, the owner of the late great Bar Norman, the current wine director of Long Bon, James Beard's outstanding restaurant of 2024, and now the founder of High Five Imports. Well, Dana, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your time and insight and experience. And you have had such a whirlwind life of amazing experiences. And I want to touch on as many as I can. But I would love to start, if you're willing, to tell us about the wine that you brought today and why it's special to you.
Yeah. So, well, first, I'm so touched that you reached out, and I'm really pleased to be here and to spend this time with you. We never get like just an hour to sit and talk with women that inspire us. So this is really such a pleasure. And so I brought a bottle of Muscadet from the Loire. And this is from Domaine de la Pepinière. And it's from the Chateau Thébault Clos. And I brought it because the Loire Valley was really the region that kind of blew the doors off of wine, but really natural wine for me almost 20 years ago. And this is an estate that in particular has been just really close to my heart, importer that's been really close to my heart. And it just felt like, let's take it all the way back to the beginning.
Yeah.
And I love the wines. And the estate has gone through really big changes over the last like 4 years because the original proprietor, Marc Olivier, retired in 2019, 2020. And so Gwendolyn and Remy, who have been working at the estate for years, are now running it, doing all the farming, making the wines. It's their estate now. And so I love seeing things kind of move on to the next generation, whether it's the children or just people coming up under the wine grower and seeing that they really have such reverence for the vines and the estate and the winemaking. And the wines are just still so delicious. So
I love that this speaks to something larger, I think, about the evolution of the natural wine movement. And I feel like you are the exact right person to talk about this, because I almost think of Pepinière now as a more classic producer.
Absolutely.
But, and that's been, I guess, my experience of them in recent years. But you're saying like they were associated with the forefront of like the natural wine movement. That's so fascinating.
Yep. Yeah, I'm so excited to dive into this with you today because I have so many thoughts and opinions about natural wine. But when I was starting in the business and my husband and I were working together, we weren't married, we weren't even together at the time, but we were working together as colleagues. We had like become sort of like newly aware of what was happening in the Loire Valley, and the wines for us were kind of the most moving, soul-satisfying wines that we had ever experienced. And Pepinière was among those growers. And these are people that have always worked organically. The inputs are minimal. If anything, in the vines, in the cellar, it's a little sulfur, or in the case of Muscadet, it's a little more sulfur. But for us, we were like, that is everything that speaks to us. And man, I just hope that we can somehow like move back to that in the conversation about natural wine. So yeah, I'm a big fan of these like classic yet natural growers.
Well, and I think, these are the wines that I try to I think a lot of us try to put forward and champion. Yet it's hard I get nervous about saying the word natural nowadays because it's so associated with this like hipster, natty nat, glue, like bright neon labels, funky thing.
Absolutely.
And that's a bummer because like these wines are truly natural and non-intervention. But just because they're not branded that way, it's like, do you want to associate them with that?
I think, you know, the natural wine movement, when it started, and whether we're talking about where it started in Beaujolais in France or, you know, further south in the Ardèche and the Rhone, I think that the heart of that movement was really about making wines that these growers believed in and included a lot of people that weren't able to drink wine or access wine. And it was sort of like bringing down this very aristocratic sort of thing to something that was everyday. And we've gotten so far away from that. This thing that was supposed to be very inclusive has become really exclusive. And it's sort of like a if you know kind of club. And to me, that is just like the antithesis of what wine is, right? It's not bringing people together. It's actually pushing people apart. And so I don't know, these growers in this camp really to me are still what I consider like the heart of natural wine. And I'm sure that's controversial, but these are the wines that I reference a lot.
No, I love it. And I want to circle back to it. And, but first I want to back up a little bit.
Yeah.
So I would say a lot of people in Portland probably know your name, and in the wine world and beyond, associating you as a sommelier and having run these really iconic Portland wine programs, Ava Jeans, Tusk at one point, 23 Hoyt as the throwback. But you've worked on all sides of the wine industry. You've repped wine for other distributors. You've worked retail. You've worked harvest. You've made wine with your husband under your own brand, Bow and Arrow. You've owned your own bar, the beloved Bar Norman, rest in peace.
Rest in peace.
I know. And now you're starting your own importing company. So you've really like done the whole scope of the wine experience. But I actually want to ask you a question, taking it way back.
Okay.
Right out of high school, you joined the Peace Corps. Is that right?
Out of college.
Out of college.
Yeah.
What led you there? Because I'm seeing all these things in the wine world, and it fits into this idea I have of like high achiever, you know, goal oriented. And then there's like the Peace Corps. And I'm like so fascinated to understand how that fits in and why you chose to do that.
I graduated from the University of Montana, and I had studied journalism and early European history. And I knew that I didn't want to be a journalist. And I just had no idea what was going to be next for me. But I've always been deeply passionate about travel, seeing the world. I was an exchange student in Russia when I was in high school. So I just thought there's something else for me to be doing that doesn't involve just like going and getting a job and a career that I'm like not actually really interested in doing. And I thought, well, I want to go see some of the world. I really am like, I've always been deeply empathetic, and I like to do things to care for other people. And I was like, I think Peace Corps is the perfect situation for me to go see some of the world, work for other people, be out of just like my American bubble for a while. And so I applied, and I had no idea where I was going to go. I was really open. I said, send me anywhere in the world. And I was placed in Romania.
Wow.
So, and so I was in Romania. I did actually 2 tours in the Peace Corps. So I was there for almost 4 years.
In Romania the whole time?
In Romania the whole time. Yeah.
What sort of activities or tasks were you involved in?
I was teaching. So I was an English teacher at a grade school working with, a high school. So I was working with kids from, 13, 14 years up all the way through 18, teaching English, but I also taught theater. I've always been kind of a drama theater nerd. And so I also started a kind of a theater club and had like a group of kids that we had a really awesome group of kids that traveled around the state or around the country and went to different theater competitions and stuff like that. So it was super cool.
That's
super
amazing.
Cool.
The more conversations like these we're having, I'm like, I'm starting to develop a hypothesis that like women in wine or people in wine have these like creative other lives. Like everyone has theater, dance,
Yep.
music,
Yep.
as like this through line.
I think so.
Where coming out of the Peace Corps, well, is that where you fell in love with wine? Like, was
Absolutely
wine?
not.
No? Okay.
I drank so much beer when I lived there. You know, it's this thing, I've talked to a bunch of people that have like traveled in Europe in their younger years or worked in Europe in their younger years and then came back to the States and got into wine. And they always look back and are like, man, those 4 years I was living in Italy, it would have been a really perfect time for me to get into wine, but I wasn't into it. And this was basically me. Also, the wines that I had access to in Romania were mostly sweet wines. They were the product of a communistic government kind of dictating how wine was to be made, and most of it was getting shipped out of the country. And so there wasn't even sort of a interest in it at all. But I have always loved to cook, always. And living in Romania, I was spending so much time at the market and cooking with the seasons because that's just how you do when you live there. You don't go to the grocery store and buy whatever out of season produce you feel like cooking with. You're really limited to what you can get in the market. And so I just taught myself a lot, learned a lot from neighbors and people that I lived close to. And I thought, well, I'm at the end of 4 years, I'm either going to, this was the idea, move to Turkey and try and become an English teacher. I had traveled there and absolutely loved it. And I thought, and everybody that I'd met there that were English teachers said, oh, it's so easy. You just kind of show up and you can stand outside with a sign that says, I'll teach English and you will get hired. So I thought, I'll do that. Or maybe I should go back to the US and figure out how to live in the US as an adult because I hadn't done that yet. So I came back to the States and thinking maybe I would go to culinary school.
So that is what you started, right? You
Yep.
came back and you dipped your toe in culinary school?
I didn't even go to culinary school. I got picked up by somebody mentioned to me that they had a restaurant, they were a chef, and that I shouldn't spend my money on culinary school, but that I could come and intern with them. And if that worked out, they would hire me and I could basically learn on the job.
So you also dipped your toe, and I know this is jumping ahead a little bit, but through this restaurant, you worked back of house, then you worked front of house, and you realized you really loved wine.
Yep.
And I know you did some or a little bit of the quartermaster sommeliers.
Yep.
What is your outlook on or relationship with, I guess, formal education in the sense of like culinary school or sommelier school or winemaking school, as opposed to like lived life, on the job experience?
It's complicated. It's complicated because I think that formal education has a place. I absolutely think it has a place. I think it just depends on if that place is good for you and what you need. I also have a real problem with the cost of formal education and the barrier to entry for most people. And so, it's hard for me to say to people who ask, like, should I do this? Should I sign up for this course? Yes, you should. But also I see the place for it. And for some people, that's the best way for them to learn is in a formal education setting, right? So it's tough. It's hard to say.
Well, it sounds like you were really, correct me if I'm wrong, you seem like someone who, when you've set your mind on, I want to learn about this thing, you really like dive in and do it.
Yeah.
And could you talk a little bit about just how much you immersed yourself in wine at the beginning? Like, it sounds like you were working in restaurants, you were in tasting groups, you were working harvest. Like, at what point did you decide, I love wine, and just go in 110%?
Yeah, I would say, so I was working at a really fantastic restaurant in Bend where I was living at the time that was in the early days of just the amazing economic boom that we were feeling here in the country. And this was a duo of brothers that had moved from San Francisco to Bend. So they had all of these accolades and all of this energy behind them from San Francisco. Bend was just an absolute boom town at the time. And there was a lot of money there. And they came and opened a big, what felt like very splashy, kind of fancy restaurant in Bend. Not white tablecloth fancy, but just the likes that Bend had never seen before. And I was working there, front of house, just serving. And the crew that was involved with wine they were all really cool people. And I had never in my mind associated wine with anything cool. I had always kind of associated it with old guys in suits, to be honest, or like the thing that my parents drank. And when I realized that there was this like young energy that was behind the wine, I was just so intrigued. I was so interested. And so we started a tasting group there at the restaurant. And at the time we had access to incredible Oregon Pinots. I mean, we could drink Domaine Serene, we could drink Bergstrom, we could drink Archery Summit, we could drink all of the like kind of early adopters, early pioneers of Oregon Pinot there. And it was like accessible to us. It was available all the time. And I was drinking, learning about Chateauneuf du Pape and Bandol and Barolo and like the kind of the major Burgundy, for sure, the major wine regions. And it was just totally accessible because of kind of the stature of the restaurant. And that's where I just realized like, this is my thing. And I remember so specifically being like, can you make a career out of this? Or is this just, am I just
the
like,
Somm movies. Yeah.
For sure. And it was like, can you make a career in restaurants, in hospitality with a focus on wine? Because to me, it was always like a transitional job. Like you did it while you were a theater student, or you did it while you were, waiting for your next like career move or whatever. It wasn't like, oh, this is the career. But I remember so clearly during that time being like, I cannot remember the last time I was so deeply passionate and excited about something. And at the time I wasn't participating in the court. So I was just grabbing books and like eating them. On my time off from the restaurant, I was like, I still have my original wine books that were all like highlighted in, was going to my tasting group. And I was like, this is all I can think about.
And that's what a formal education would aspire to implant in someone, is that amount of passion.
Exactly.
So it's like, like you said, if someone needs help getting that fuel, then maybe they do need a formal education. But if you already have that fire like lit inside of you, you're going to learn just as well on your own.
Yeah.
And did you realize at the time, did everyone in that group realize like how cool Oregon Pinot was yet? Or was it still kind of this outlier?
No, I mean, it was definitely like, these are very cool wines. Because this was early 2000s. So, like 2004, 2005. So there was definitely like a lot of excitement around those wines.
And was that one of the first choices you made to go work harvest? Like at that time, were you thinking, did you know you wanted to stay on the restaurant side, or were you considering going to become a winemaker?
No, I was never considering wanting to be a winemaker, but I wanted as much experience as I could so that I could really learn about wine. And so I went from basically this tasting group and working at this restaurant was my launch to go into the Court of Master Sommeliers. And the tasting group really encouraged it. And they were like, take this test, kind of, we'll help you study for it. So I took the intro exam and really kind of, I don't remember like loving the format. I'm not awesome in test taking environments, but I did like having something to study for. And kind of that put a little bit of like positive pressure on me. And then I decided I would study for the certified exam, the level 2. And that's what brought me really to Portland. I took the level 2 and passed it. And then I thought, okay, it's time for me to leave Bend. I'd been there for a couple years. I'm ready to go do something else. And that's how I ended up in Portland. And I worked harvest at Argyle my first year living here. Yeah. And I had known some of the Argyle crew by this connection through the restaurant. They had come over to sell wines before. And so it was kind of again, right time, right place where I could just reach out and say, do you need any help with harvest? And they brought me on and I worked harvest with them. And I did that and realized I don't want to be a winemaker.
It's props to you that you even went and did a full harvest though, because I feel like so many people on the restaurant side, myself included, like I'll go out and work a day here or a day there, but it's a big time commitment to like stop your life and just go be out there all the time.
And I was newly living in Portland and commuting out to Argyle every day and then working like whatever the 10-hour shift and driving back. And it was an amazing experience. And I'm so glad that I did it. And it definitely for me was like, okay, I'm taking this off the box. Like I've seen how a harvest works, especially at like a bigger scale winery, which Argyle isn't that big, but bigger scale compared to some of the micro wineries we have here. And I was like, that's really fascinating. Glad I did it. That's definitely not my avenue. I love hospitality so much.
Because around the same time, you also tried retail as well, right?
Yeah, it was kind of a mix of different things that were happening.
Yeah.
It was retail happening at that time.
And new seasons.
Yep, exactly. Which is where the sort of all of the learning about Pepier and Louis Dresner selections and all of that happened in that time. So yeah, so I'm so grateful that I did it. And I think if there are opportunities for people to work harvest, I just encourage it 100%, because I think if you, regardless of what side of the business you are working in or you're interested in, to understand how like we go from grapes to this is so fantastic if you have the opportunity to do it.
Well, and I just think it's so admirable. It almost seems to me you're like, okay, I love wine, but like, I'm going to try retail. I'm going to try winemaking. I'm going to try distribution. I'm going to like, it's almost like the Goldilocks thing. You're like, what is just the right fit for me? And I think so many people are curious, maybe about the industry they're already in, or maybe about a totally different one, but they're so afraid to fail or to be judged for trying something and then not liking it and changing their mind. Have you always been conscious of like not being afraid to fail, or is that something you've gotten better at as you've gotten older? Or?
I'm very afraid to fail.
Or just being unafraid to try new things, maybe, you know?
Yeah, it's more of just like, I think I live my life with a very, very deep curiosity. And I think, and I don't even know if this was very like conscious when I was young and new in my career, but I felt like there is so much to know and understand and learn. And I've heard this is like a common refrain, I think, from people who work in wine, is like, you can't ever know all the things there are to know. It's like an exhaustible amount of knowledge. And so I think for me, just the curiosity was always like, okay, well, how do you do this? And so, okay, I know how to like sell some stuff, but I should probably learn like how retail works. And that's what kind of led me into retail. And I also kind of looked at it as like, ultimately, whatever I settle on, and that's been, for the most part, hospitality. If I know about how wine is made, that's only going to like help me in this, in my work. And if I know how retail works and what it's like to be a buyer, gosh, that's going to make me so much more proficient as somebody that sells wine and works in hospitality. And so I've sort of looked at it as all of these pieces that fit together to make me more like, I don't know, proficient sounds like such a like dry word. Yeah. I'm a croissant.
A wine-filled croissant.
Exactly.
Well, so you do the CMS, you move to Portland, and pretty quickly you end up as a wine director.
Yeah.
Pretty quickly, right?
Yep.
And I remember, and this is just my experience, like I ended up as a wine director arguably way sooner than I should have.
Yep.
Like I got hired as a somm at a new restaurant that we were just opening, and then the wine director got fired like within 2 weeks, and they just handed me the role. And I remember feeling very out of my depth. And also as a young woman, I'm just curious, like, and I was lucky, like my partner at the time, like he was at another restaurant, but I could lean on him for like advice on how to build this list and how to run it. But how did you navigate that? And what was your experience like as a relatively inexperienced young woman stepping into this sort of high profile position?
I definitely look back now and think I was very underqualified, but I also am extremely grateful for that, because I really see each of the things that I've done in my career as a stepping stone to the next thing. And if I wouldn't have had this opportunity at 23 Hoyt and Clark Lewis to run those wine programs, you know, the trajectory could have been totally different. Somebody took a chance on me, you know. I think that they saw my just like passion and my enthusiasm and my willingness to work really hard. And so, you know, I'm super grateful for that opportunity, but also recognize like I was not qualified yet to do that. And you know, it was hard. I definitely, and I've heard you talk with some other guests about this, like this idea of you go to the table has requested to talk to the wine director, and you show up at the table and you're excited to talk about the wines, and they say, oh, no, we're waiting for the wine director. And then you say, well, that's me. I'm the wine director. And just this sort of like, sometimes it was met with surprise. Sometimes it was met with doubt. You know, people just like not understanding, like, oh, you don't look like what we imagine a wine director to look like, or you're so young, like how could you possibly possess whatever knowledge We have. And I didn't know enough, and I was writing a very ego-driven wine list at that point, a wine list that really represented me rather than a list that represented the restaurant and really understood like, what does the customer want to drink? And so, I was trying to sell like Rombauer Chardonnay drinkers Greek Assyrtiko, and being like, but this is one that's aged in oak. So I think it's gonna, like my brain was in the right place.
Which I think there is a time and a place for that.
Totally.
But you're saying you could have just met the list a little bit more where people
exactly. I really was not reading the room and meeting people where they were at. I was very like, this is my first wine director job. I'm going to write the list I want to write. Certainly I felt that I went with a food, but, I look back now and I would never put a list together that way, so, but very, very good learning for me for sure.
Well, and I think like that does go into this, it probably, correct me if I'm wrong, like that, the way you led that list and the mark you put on it was what led to your next position, right? That people took notice that you were doing really interesting things. So I think there's always like, you don't want to just make people so comfortable to the point that like you don't see like what you are bringing to the table. So I think it's a dance.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think when it comes to especially writing wine lists, it is like this dance like you're talking about it. It's part of it is about the wine director, part of it is about the food, and part of it is about the guests. And how do you get those three things? Like what's the Venn diagram that fits all of those things together? And I just wasn't in that place yet. I think I've always been just like a little bit before my time too. So I was just like, we're going to get people to drink Greek Assyrtiko and they're going to love it. You know what I mean? But now I feel like you could put a wine like that on a list anywhere and people would be excited and go for it. And, I just did a pairing with Retsina last month at Longbon. And it was just like there was not enough to keep it in stock. You know what I mean?
Amazing.
So it was a little bit of like being ahead of my time and a little bit of just like too ego driven and not reading the room,
I get, I don't know. I never want to be like negative on here, but I do get disappointed sometimes when I go out in Portland and otherwise. And I feel like people don't put enough thought into the list. And it's like, I would almost rather have an ego-driven list than just like a list that's the same as every other. And like you say, it should be a balance, but I think so often people play it safe, especially in the world that restaurants live in right now where everyone's
can't
afraid
afford
of
to take risks.
survival.
We can't afford to take risks. So it's sort of like, what do we know is going to sell? And that's what has a space on the list,
I'm curious what your thoughts are on the buzzword topic of manifestation in the sense that, I think about the next position that you got where someone came in and just basically offered you this role in distribution.
Yep.
Maybe you could share that story and the story of how you got the book. Like it almost seems like it was just not right place, right time, but you could look at it from the outside and say like, wow, that just really lined up.
Yeah.
Well, were those ever things that were on your radar and you were like trying to bring that into your life? Right. Or are you just open to like new opportunities and willing to get excited about them?
It's the latter. Okay. I'm really, I wasn't looking to get out of hospitality, but I was approached by a distributor who I had been buying wine from for a couple of years. And they just said, you don't realize, and I will never forget this conversation because it has stuck with me. And I recognize how important this is just in the world. They said, you don't realize this, but this has been like a 2-year job interview, like that we've been working with you. And somebody was leaving the company and they wanted to hire someone and they recognized that I didn't have any wholesale distribution import experience, but that I had, whatever it was that they were looking for, kind of the passion about the wines, the drive, and so I wasn't even really looking to leave hospitality at all. It just was this opportunity was given to me. And I think, again, it was like, okay, I've never done that. I don't know anything about distribution, but what I do know for certain is that if I understand what it's like to carry a bag and to sell wine and to call on accounts, I will become a better buyer and a better wine director.
100%.
And I knew that for sure. On top of that, they had, at the time, the best portfolio in Portland.
What distributor was this?
It was Triage Wines.
I've never worked with them.
Yeah, and it was the really like the big early movement of natural wine. And so it was all of the best portfolios in one book. And so it was like, well, this is a crazy great opportunity. And yeah, and it was part flattery that they reached out to me, but also again, just the curiosity of like learning that part of the business and then parlaying that into when I'm back in hospitality, how does that work with me as a buyer?
And did you...
So I didn't manifest it.
Well, when you've been willing to kind of make these right turns or detours or like, let me go explore this, let me go explore this, is there ever a moment, because I've done those and then I've felt stuck and I'm like, oh, I know that I don't love this and I want to get back to something else, but I'm afraid that I'm going to look like I'm a quitter or people are going to judge me for not sticking with something? Or how do you have the courage to be like, nope, this is where I turn back?
Yeah. This is a good question because I really fight with a lot of self-doubt, imposter syndrome, fear of failure. These are common themes my entire life. So I think as I've grown more into my 40s, I've realized that that we get one life. And if we're doing things that aren't fulfilling, that aren't satisfying, that are making us feel not well, whether physically or mentally, if we can't be available to the people in our lives, then we have to make changes. And ultimately, I think that is what guides me, but it's not easy. It's not easy at all. I knew for certain that distribution was not my route as much as I knew that winemaking was not my route. But I was really, I got to a point where I was really committed to the growers and the portfolios. I loved my coworkers. But rejection's really hard for me. Mm-hmm. And you, as a wine rep, you just are committing to lots of rejection.
Oh, yeah.
And it was also a time in Portland when I was doing that a lot of the buyers were still older men. Mm-hmm. And I was put into some fairly uncomfortable positions. Just again, at being a young woman and dealing with men who had been in the business 20, 30 years longer than I had. It was difficult for sure.
And I've never thought about that. I mean, I repped for a very short period of time and I also did not like it and did not like the constantly having to like sell. I felt like I was having to sell myself just as much as these wines. And when you're a buyer, you are in this position of power a little bit more. Like you hold the cards, people are trying to get you to buy this thing. And I think I did it for such a short period of time that I never felt like I was in a specifically uncomfortable situation, but I could absolutely see how that would be the case.
It's a real like power imbalance. Yeah. It was at the time. It's hard for me to say now just because I think we're so much more socially aware. And a lot of those buyers have since retired. Mm-hmm. So we're working with a lot of people that are kind of in the same age range as buyers and reps. But yeah, I this idea of selling yourself, and I always felt that way. Yeah. Always is terrible.
And then they don't buy a wine just because they have like another Pinot Noir already.
Right, exactly.
But you feel like it's like a personal rejection.
Right, exactly.
I don't know how people in sales do it.
No, I know. And there are people in Portland who are phenomenal, like exceptional sales reps. And I love working with people like that just really know how to do it and do it so well. But B, I think it takes a lot of courage to do that job.
100%.
I really think it takes a lot of courage. So, yeah.
When the opportunity for the book came along, which I love that book, by the way. It's one of my very favorite.
Thank you.
I mean, there's not that many wine like cookbooks.
No, not really.
I mean, there's like wine information books. Yep. But I feel like those are geared more towards wine professionals in a lot of cases, or people that already have this vested interest in wine. And I loved how accessible that book was. Like you can give that to just someone who likes food or just someone who wants to host dinner parties. Yeah. Where could you tell the story of like where that idea came from? Yeah. Again, how it kind of like beautifully unfolded? Yeah, this was another like not manifesting I didn't have on my bucket list, like must write a book. Yeah. But a
friend of mine, Andrea Sloniker, who was my co-author on the book, but at the time we were friends. We kind of knew each other tangentially through the business. Andrea's husband is a winemaker and had worked kind of shared space with my husband. And so we knew each other, but we weren't great friends. But she's a culinary creative here in Portland and a cookbook author. And so we had lunch one day with a mutual friend. And it was the day that we had lunch was a day that Andrea's, at that time, her most recent book had published, which was called Beer Bites, that she had written with Christian De Benedetti, the brewer and owner of Wolves and People.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
And they had put out this book called Beer Bites, and we were having lunch with a mutual friend, and we were toasting her, congratulations on your book. Hey, wouldn't it be so cool if we did a book called Wine Bites? And it just, and the friend that we were having lunch with was like, you have to do this book, make it happen. You're like the wine person, you're the food person. Both of us have like crossover and working in the other's industry. And that's really where the idea was born. And we really got to talking about it. We went and sat in the stacks at Powell's, dug through every wine book that we could find to sort of like do the research of like what exists out there. And there are pairing books. They're a bit, now they're a bit out of date. And there was actually a book that had been published called Wine Bites, and years and years and years ago. So anyway, that's how it happened. And I was never like, I should write a book.
Yeah.
But we had just this like amazing brain meld. We worked on the book for over 2 years. It was published in the 3rd year. And Andrea is one of my dearest friends now to this day because of that experience. So
did that fulfill like I could see that being a totally different like wine arena, like a very indoor, creative, more,
totally.
I guess not solitary, you're working with another person, but very different than a restaurant floor environment.
Absolutely. You're not wearing your hospitality hat. I mean, I feel like I'm always wearing my hospitality hat. So I'm thinking about like, how are we writing about wine so that it reaches people and it makes sense to them, and we're not giving like too much wine speak. Mm-hmm. So the hospitality hat was on in that way, but it was way more of just this like deeply creative pursuit. I do a lot of things in my life just to like see if I can do it.
Yeah.
And doing this book was like, well, I've never done that before. Let's just like see what this experience is like. I just want to see if I can do it. I became a marathon runner because I was like, I really don't like to run. Like, I don't like to run.
I did the same thing.
And I was like, and I really leaned on my sister who motivated me. And I started running, and then I started running a little more. And then I ran a half marathon. I was like, I'm going to run a marathon. And then I ran like 4 marathons, and it's mostly just like I do things to really challenge myself. And I think that I look at the book that way. It was like, never done something like this.
I loved hearing you say that because when I first opened Arden, Alex and I split up and we split the businesses, and suddenly I was left with this restaurant, and I was like really struggling with this idea of imposter syndrome. And I got a business coach, I got a new therapist, and I was circling around this idea of like confidence, like where does confidence come from? And I don't remember where I heard it, podcast, book, something, but it was like, confidence comes from showing yourself that you can do things that you thought you couldn't do.
Yep.
And I started running for the exact same reason, because I was like, I hate running, and I ran a half marathon, then a marathon. And I feel like picking out, that's such a good lesson for anyone in life, whether it's running or starting a business or just doing anything, putting yourself out there in the dating world. Like when you can show your brain, like, no, I actually can do this thing that we have this idea that we can't do. That makes you think, well, what else is possible? And I feel like your life is such a great example of that.
Thank you.
Like you've done it all.
Yeah, I don't like to be bored.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like to repeat. I cook a lot at home, and I don't like to repeat meals. I don't like to repeat outfits. I just like to do things that I haven't done and experience things that I haven't experienced before. And so I think that's where a lot of this has come in my career, and
This might be a good time to just briefly touch back on natural wine.
Yeah.
How did you kind of decide early on in your wine career like this? Because at the time the movement was fairly small. Like it
really
was in
small,
the
quiet,
minority.
very quiet, very small,
and very like controversial in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
How did you decide like this is where I want to be aligned?
Yeah.
And has that shifted over the years? And like where does your thoughts on it lie now?
I think that they were the wines that most consistently moved me, like really moved me. So I'm the kind of wine professional, and sometimes I'm embarrassed to say this, like I don't really memorize bottles or vintages, or I'm more think about wine in terms of like experiences and like who I was with, opposed to like it was this bottle from this vintage in this place. And so I think that they were the wines that really, they just moved me so much and made me think more like, not critically about wine, but yeah, I think critically, I think I started thinking so much more about farming at that time when I was exposed to a lot of these natural wines early in my career. And I just, when I would drink conventional or like more industrial style wines, I was having a harder time wrapping my head around them and enjoying them. Like, honestly, I just wasn't really enjoying them anymore. And so it just, to me, became like, these were the bottles I was reaching for. These are the wines I was most excited to like buy, either on the retail side or as a somm. They were the ones I was most excited to talk about and sell with people. Yeah, I just connected with them so much more.
I've never thought about what you just said with like it's almost like if you're drinking a wine that has a lot of pedigree, like a Premier Cru or a Grand Cru or a really iconic clos or vineyard or producer, there's this inevitable expectations that comes along with that. And you're inevitably analyzing, you're comparing your experience to what you think the books have told you it should be. And maybe that's changing with natural wine as some producers become more well-known.
Right.
But at the time, and with a lot of these producers, you're just experiencing it. You're like, this is just coming from some normal vineyard that they're like pouring a lot of love into. But it's not a Grand Cru. It's not this pedigree thing. They're just making really great wine.
Yeah. When Scott and I first got together, we drank a lot of Loire Valley wine. And part of it was just the interest and the just like fascination with the wines. But a big part of it was what we could afford. Because we used to be able to buy Peppier Muscadet for $8.50 a bottle night for like the basic cuvee. Was $9 a bottle. And we could buy that knowing that Muscadet has amazing ageability. We could buy a case of Peppier Muscadet and put it away for a year or 2 years. And our investment in that wine was so little for such a great reward. And we could not buy Burgundy. We weren't buying Bordeaux. We weren't drinking champagne because we couldn't afford it. And so I think that also really has, looking at the early parts of the natural wine movement, spoke to me as like, these were really wines for people to just like, you could afford them. You could put them down if you wanted. You could drink them tomorrow with a bunch of friends. But they had an accessibility to them that a lot of other wines didn't have.
I really feel like that ethos carried through into Bar Norman.
Thanks.
Like I feel like that was a place designed around like creativity and accessibility. Like you would walk in and there would be, not only was the physical space just like welcoming and low key, like not overly pretentious or, you didn't feel like you had to be dressed up or something. But then the wines were like humble and delicious.
Thanks.
Was that conscious, I'm sure?
Absolutely. Bar Norman was really, I think, the culmination of everything that I loved in wine and in my like very fortunate ability to travel to different wine regions and to different cities around the world that really like wine is a pillar of what happens there. And I wanted to create a place that I would love to hang out at and hoped that other people wanted that same thing. And the idea was really like, this has to be comfortable. People have to be able to walk in here and feel like they can know nothing about wine. They can know some things about wine, or they can know a whole lot about wine. And either way, we're going to take care of you and see you and create space for you exactly the same way. So it was very conscious for sure.
Could you talk about the name? Because that is very in line with that too, right?
So Norman was my grandfather, my mom's dad. And he was in my life until he was 98. And so I had him in my life till about 13 years ago. And we were very close. My whole family is really close. And we were really close. And he wasn't like he drank wine. He had like a glass of wine every night, but he wasn't like an inspiration for me to get into wine or to open the bar or anything. But it was more about who he was as a person and this idea of like, if you put your mind to something, you can make it happen. And there's a lot to gain from like perseverance and putting yourself out there in the world. And so he was really
Austrian, right?
He was Austrian. Yep. Yeah.
Because I know, I didn't realize that you had this kind of like Austrian history, because you just started an Austrian wine importing.
Yep.
And when I first heard that, I was like, oh, that's interesting, Austrian wine.
Yep.
And I can't believe I didn't realize, like, he escaped the Holocaust in Austria, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Wow.
Both my grandfather Norman and my grandmother Nora and her mom all escaped, but the rest of, there were some various cousins that also escaped, but all of my great grandparents, the brothers and sisters, everyone perished. And so they came to the US. They escaped very luckily through London to the US, and they had always wanted to go back. They were very, very proud Viennese citizens, and they always wanted to go back, and it wasn't possible for them. And so, there's a lot of I'm deeply, deeply connected to my family. And so in a way, like, this bar was an ode to them, but to my family, to my parents. And that connection that I have with all of them.
How difficult has it been to be a mother and do all of these things? Like, I look around in the restaurant industry and I don't see that many women deciding to have children. I think that's an overall common thread that we're seeing in society, but I feel like disproportionately more so in these professions that make it really difficult.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think a lot of people do feel like it's too hard to have it all. I'm like, I feel like that,
Yeah.
So I like really admire women that are like, no, I'm going to be a mom and do all the things.
Yeah. You remember growing up how it was always like, you can have it all. You can do whatever you want. And it's like, well, you can with limitations, right?
Or with a lot of money.
Yeah, exactly. Or a lot of money, opportunities, things like that. I absolutely love being a mom so much. And I also recognize that there is no world in which I could do any of this without the support of an amazing husband who's also a tremendously wonderful dad, but a real, a true partner. I could not do it without him. I couldn't do it without my family. And without just our village of people, the number of times we've called on friends to be like, hey, can you help out tonight? How does movie night sound? Or, I don't see how it would be possible. Honestly, I really, really don't.
Was that always a mentality that you had, that you would be willing to ask for support and help? Because I find that hard. And I think a lot of women think oh, I'm supposed to be able to do it all. And therefore asking for help is a weakness. Or I'm going to impose on people,
I think that I have, through many years of therapy, really come to understand that our community wants to be called upon. I know that it feels really good when people reach out and say, hey, can you pick up my kiddo from school today? Or can my child come just have a sleepover because I'm strapped and I have to work tonight? And can we just drop our kid off? And I feel so honored that A, people trust me, but B, that they come to a place that they can reach out. And I have to remember that they also want to be leaned on. People want to be available. They want to show up for their people. And so I try and remember that, not take advantage of it, but really try and remember that feels good to be a reliable enough person that your people will reach out to you. And I have to remember to also do that. But I do think the mentality has always been oh, if you ask for help, then you don't have your shit together or whatever. You know what I mean? Why can't you figure that out on your own? And we can't keep all the balls in the air. It's not possible.
So often it's in our own head.
Of course.
Because exactly like you're saying, as soon as you do ask for help, we love being able to support the people we love. But there builds up this wall of anxiety and stress of I have to do it all on my own.
It's the story we tell ourselves, right? Rather than the actual reality of the situation, we just tell ourselves these stories. And our Scott and I have very much felt since Orly was tiny that our posture is to integrate our child into our life as much as possible, rather than creating a life only for our child. So we want her to have these real life experiences. And, when you grow up with a dad who's a winemaker and a mom who works in hospitality, you spend a lot of time at a winery and in walking in vineyards, and you spend a lot of time at your mom's bar or your mom's restaurant. And Orly has been really a part of these places and is growing up this way. I mean, one of her first words, and this is not a brag, it's just hysterical to us, that one of her first words was gamay. And, you have a kid growing up around grapes when one of their first words is gamay. So
that's amazing.
But she actually loves it. And I think it is for her to see that her mom, and we'll just talk about the mom portion of it, to see that her mom is pursuing her dreams and is working really hard. Like, I can't think of a better example for our kids than for them to see that. And I think about how many women I know who deal with this with their kids, trying to balance work and life and being there, but also fulfilling their own needs. And I think the more we can do things that are fulfilling for us, where we get to sort of like live out our dreams and our passions, the better we are as parents and as partners. But it's so great for our kids to see it too.
Because you're modeling. It's like the people that say, oh, I don't want to get a divorce because I don't want them to see. But instead you're showing a kid that like it's better to stay in an unhappy situation, whether that's a relationship or a career choice. It's like doing what's better for you is better for your child.
Exactly. Exactly.
Could you talk about because I don't want to leave without touching on the new importing project. And I'm just curious, was that tied to the choice to close Bar Norman, which I'm sure was really bittersweet?
Yeah. It was not. When I decided to close the bar, I did not have a plan, which was very scary. And I think was what held me back from closing even before I actually did it, was just the total uncertainty of what was next. I was definitely fighting, like, I'm in my mid-40s, I'm closing my business. Who am I? What am I doing? How do I continue on? I mean, there was a lot of that internal and external dialogue around closing. And I didn't really have a plan. But we'd been spending more and more time in Austria.
As a family?
Yeah, as a family. And we were 2 summers ago in Styria in the south of Austria. Not there, we had said, like, this is not a wine trip. This is summer vacation. And we had rented a flat in a city in the south down there. And we ended up just tasting some wines, meeting with some growers, and realizing very, very quickly that this is an extraordinarily special wine region with hardly any representation at all outside of really Austria, Europe. There's a handful of Styrian producers that make it to the States, but not nearly enough based on the extremely high quality, delicious wines that are made there. So I feel like it fell in our lap, to be perfectly honest. And it made the closure and the segue a lot easier, but it was certainly not.
Did you need to have some time of I can't imagine how I've closed businesses before, and it's always, I feel like there's this sad small part that is a relief in some way, because clearly like it came from a place of like something wasn't working or something, it was just hard. But there's so much grief that comes along with it. And did you find that you just needed a period to like grieve and settle before you could even think to what's next?
Yeah, there was a lot of pre-grieving. There was a lot of pre-grieving just because the pandemic dealt us what it dealt us. And so, as you know, we've all been in it for years. It wasn't like out of nowhere business fell off a cliff and we have to close. It was like this had gone on for years. So there was a lot of pre-grieving, and a lot of that was kind of tied up with the like, what am I going to do? What's my worth? Who am I? Nobody wants like a washed up 45-year-old, wine director, whatever. And so there was pre-grieving, then there was relief and a lot of like exhaling. And the bar closed in April. And then by May, I was in Austria, and then I was back again for the summer. And so I think, there wasn't a lot of downtime, but there was just a sense of relief in a lot of ways that like, I knew that the anxiety and stress that I was feeling for years was going to start dissipating.
Well,
so
and
that
I'm
was
so
really
excited
nice.
for you in this.
Thanks.
I mean, I've always thought the idea of importing wine just sounds fabulous because you're like travel, You know, you just get to hang out with great distributors. And I know there's a lot of paperwork and a lot of admin.
Totally.
And of course, it's got its own challenges. But I can imagine, like, I feel burned out on service. You know, the older I get, I'm like, oh, I do not have it in me to work the floor.
You know? For sure.
And the idea of like something a little more like office-y and traveling, like sounds fabulous. So I hope that this is going to be like, I know it's going to be a great step forward for you.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, it's a cool way to tie in, you know, my looking back at 20 years of my career, my family, just like, again, learning something new. Like I've never been an importer before. I've worked for importers. So to be kind of have this whole new skill set to learn, it feels like a really great, like this is definitely what I should be doing. And I just could not see it when I was in the depths of like figuring out how to keep a hospitality business alive post-pandemic, you know, I couldn't see it. So
if non-wine professionals want to stay in touch and like see these wines come in and figure out where to get them, can they follow the importing company or you on Instagram?
Yeah, High Five Selections.
High Five Selections.
Yeah, all spelled out on Instagram.
Cool.
Yeah, is the best way. We have a website too, but people don't use websites. So High Five Selections on Instagram is the best spot. Yeah.
And you are still doing the wine pairings at Long Bon. Is that right?
Yep. So I've been at Long Bon
the
for
most outstanding restaurant in the US. No big deal.
What a great team. I feel so lucky to work with them. And it's really reframed for me how I think about wine. And trying to remember that like we don't all exist through a Western palate. And to pair with foods that, you know, and flavors that are just things that are like unusual to us in the West, but so beautiful and so evocative of this, you know, of Southeast Asia and what a special place Thailand is. It's been such a treat, and I've been doing it for almost 7 years now. So I know
it's been years since I've gone and done the tasting.
You gotta go.
And our old general manager from Arden is now the general manager over there.
Exactly, Chris. Yeah.
Yep. So I can't wait to go back.
Yeah.
But Dana, thank you so much for being here, for bringing the wine.
Thank you. Absolutely.
All the
Thank you.
Need to have you back and talk about the other half of your life.
I know.